In 1930, more than 1,000 economists signed a letter begging the President of the United States not to make the worst economic mistake in modern history. He ignored them. The result was a trade war that turned a recession into the Great Depression. 96 years later, a different president ignored the same warnings, and once again, the machinery of collapse has been set in motion. This is not speculation, this is pattern recognition. And once you understand how the first collapse happened, you will see it happening again in real time. Welcome to the financial system. Control the money, control the history, and remember, simple is never easy. The story begins where it always begins, with politicians promising to protect their people by walling them off from the world. In 1930, it was called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Two Republican congressmen, Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis Hawley, convinced President Herbert Hoover to raise import duties on over 20,000 goods, some by as much as 60%. The logic sounded reasonable. American farmers were struggling. Factories were slowing. If you make foreign goods more expensive, people will buy American. Jobs stay home. The economy recovers. Economists warned him not to sign it. Over 1,000 of them, from Harvard, Yale, Chicago, Columbia, publicly pleaded with Hoover. They said the tariff would not save jobs. They said it would provoke retaliation. They said it would shrink trade, freeze capital, and push an already fragile economy over the edge. They were right. Within months, America's trading partners responded with their own tariffs. Canada, once the most reliable market for American goods, imposed punishing duties and turned instead toward Britain. France, Italy, Switzerland, Mexico, Argentina, one by one, they retaliated. By 1934, global trade had collapsed by 66%. American imports from Europe plunged from $1.3 billion to just $390 million. Exports to Europe fell from $2.3 billion to $784 million. The trade war didn't start the Great Depression, but it strangled any chance of recovery. Here is what most history books don't explain. The damage was not just about trade volumes, it was about confidence. When nations begin weaponizing tariffs, businesses stop investing. They don't know what rules will apply next month. They don't know which suppliers will remain viable. They don't know which markets will be open. Uncertainty becomes its own form of paralysis, and in that paralysis, economies die. That's not a lesson from textbooks. That is the lesson playing out right now. In 2025, President Donald Trump declared an economic emergency and invoked tariffs on virtually every major trading partner. The effective tariff rate on American imports rose from roughly 2.5% to nearly 17%, the highest level in over a century. On April 2, 2025, a date Trump called Liberation Day, the administration imposed sweeping new duties of at least 10% on goods from almost every country, with rates as high as 41% on certain Chinese imports. By midsummer, tariffs on specific products like steel, aluminum, automobiles, lumber, and semiconductors had reached 50% or more. The Smoot-Hawley Act raised tariffs by roughly 6 percentage points on average. The 2025 tariff regime raised them by nearly 15, and the scale of global trade today is incomparably larger than in 1930. Trade then accounted for just 5% of American GDP. Today, it is over 25%. The exposure is greater, the interdependence is deeper, the consequences are magnified. And just like in 1930, the warnings came and were ignored. Economists from across the political spectrum warned that the tariffs would raise consumer prices, disrupt supply chains, and provoke retaliation. They were right. By late 2025, studies estimated that over 90% of tariff costs were being paid by American consumers and businesses, not foreign exporters. Goldman Sachs calculated that American households faced an average burden of $1,500 per year. The Tax Policy Center estimated that the tariffs functioned as the largest tax increase as a share of GDP since 1993. And yet, The administration called it victory. China retaliated with tariffs of its own. The European Union prepared countermeasures. Canada once again pivoted, searching for alternative partners, diversifying away from American dependence. The trade architecture that had stabilized the global economy for decades began to fracture. Then came the courts. In February 2026, the Supreme Court ruled that the president's use of emergency powers to impose tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was unconstitutional. The administration lost its legal foundation. Over $166 billion in tariff revenue had already been collected and would now need to be refunded to the businesses that paid it. But the president did not retreat. Within days, he signed new executive orders invoking different legal authorities to impose fresh tariffs. The chaos deepened. This is where history rhymes most painfully. In 1930, the damage wasn't just economic, it was political. The tariffs wrecked America's international credibility. Allies felt betrayed. Trade partners formed new blocs without the United States. The global system splintered into protectionist camps, and that fragmentation helped fuel the nationalism that led to the Second World War. Today, the same centrifugal forces are at work. Supply chains are being rerouted. Nations are hedging their dependence on American markets. The trust that underlies international cooperation is eroding, and every time a new tariff is announced or rescinded or challenged in court, businesses freeze, waiting, calculating, afraid to commit. That uncertainty is the silent killer. It slows investment, it postpones hiring, it chokes the engine of growth. The lesson of Smoot-Hawley was supposed to be permanent. For nearly a century, American policymakers, Republicans and Democrats alike, avoided large-scale tariff hikes precisely because they remembered. Ronald Reagan, no enemy of American industry, warned in 1986 that the Smoot-Hawley Tariff ignited an international trade war and helped sink our country into the Great Depression. But institutional memory fades. The politicians who lived through that era are gone. The economists who warned are dismissed as elites, and the old mistakes are dressed up in new slogans. This is not a prediction of collapse, but it is a warning. The conditions that deepened the Great Depression, retaliatory tariffs, contracting trade, policy uncertainty, and shattered confidence are present again. The economic immune system that prevented such mistakes for decades has weakened, and the architects of current policy either do not understand the historical parallel or do not care. What does this mean for you? It means that inflation pressures may linger, that prices for everyday goods, electronics, automobiles, furniture, even food may rise unpredictably, that businesses will delay expansion and hiring until the rules stabilize, that your savings, your job security, and your purchasing power are all to some degree hostages to policy chaos you cannot control. And here is the final uncomfortable truth. In 1932, after Smoot-Hawley had done its damage, voters swept the Republicans out of power. The bill's sponsors, Smoot and Hawley, lost their seats. The architects of disaster were punished at the ballot box. But by then, the damage was done. Millions had lost their jobs, their homes, and their futures. The lesson came too late. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. It's financial system, and history leaves clues. I show you where the money leads.